Hello and welcome to earlymusicsources.com. My name is Elam Rotem and today we'll talk about the Romanesca. In our episode about improvisation, we mentioned the Romanesca, one of the popular harmonic sequences that was used in countless vocal and instrumental pieces in the 16th and 17th centuries. In this episode, we'll have a close look at the Romanesca, its form, its history, and how it was used in compositions. Let's start. Why don't we just cut to the chase? Here is the basic form of the Romanesca. We'll now listen to a very simple rendition of it. Unless explicitly noted, all the examples played in this episode were created especially for this occasion. As you see, the Romanesca is in triple time. Mostly it's also in this tonality, second mode if you like, and always starting on the third degree of the mode. A very close form to the Romanesca is the passamezzo. Here is a sample rendition of the passamezzo. The only differences from the Romanesca are the first note of the sequence and the meter. The passamezzo starts on the first degree of the mode and is in duple meter. Pieces based on the Romanesca sequence first appeared in musical sources in Spain in the middle of the 16th century. Probably the earliest example is found in a collection by Luis de Narváez in 1538. Under a variation piece titled Guárdame las vacas, there is a piece with the harmonic sequence that will later be called Romanesca. 8 years later, when Alonso Mudara used the term Romanesca for the first time in a publication, he titled the piece Romanesca, or Guárdame las vacas. In Spain, the form remained connected with its original title, at times indicated simply as Las Vacas. By the way, Guárdame las vacas in English means look out for the cows. From that moment and well into the 17th century, countless pieces were composed using the Romanesca sequence. From instrumental variation pieces or partite to vocal monodies and duets with basso continuo. In instrumental pieces, the sequence will be repeated with variations, and in vocal pieces, the sequence would commonly be the accompaniment for one verse of text, and then repeated for further verses. See the footnotes page for a database made especially for this episode with more than 50 Romanesca pieces. An explanation for why so many Romanesca pieces were written could be the fact that, at least in Italy, the Romanesca was often used as a generic accompaniment for singing poetry, a bit like the psalm tones in church, where on a simple musical formula one can sing different texts. This might also explain how come the Romanesca sequence, or parts of it, or variants of it, are found in so many Renaissance songs. Here is just a random example from a famous English tune. There were 3 ravens set on a tree, down a down, hey down, hey down. There were 3 ravens set on a tree with a down. There were 3 ravens set on a tree, they were as black as they might be, with a down, derry, 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 down, down. Now that we have a better idea of what the Romanesca is, we can examine its form in more details. Let's see. The Romanesca can be divided into 2 short musical sentences, the opening A and the closing B. In actual Romanesca pieces, there is normally an additional section, either a repetition of the B part, or a little ritornello or ripresa that can sometimes be repeated as well. This additional part might have stemmed from the original function of the Romanesca as a generic accompaniment for poetry. On the A and B the text was sung, and before the next verse a little instrumental interlude took place. Anyhow, it seems that the form was not strict, as even within one Romanesca piece of a single composer one can find variety in the form in the different variations. Now, while the A is always the same throughout the Romanesca repertoire, the B as well as the little ritornelli are sometimes different. The B part very often will touch the C during the cadence, like this. I'll play this B part from Ascanio Maione's Romanesca, published in 1609. I intentionally won't show you Maione's score while I play it, so you can stay focused on the Romanesca's skeleton. As in many elaborated versions of the Romanesca, the pace of the sequence is very slow, so there will be place for creativity. Another variation of the B part includes skipping the G and arriving on the C immediately, like this. In fact, as far as I know, it is used only by Bernardo Storace in a publication from 1664. But as it is so nice, let's have a listen to it. The ritornello also has several variants throughout the repertoire. In one of the earliest keyboard versions by Antonio Valente in 1576, it looks like that. I'll play from the B part. Here is a later version of the same thing, but slower and with some diminutions. An excerpt from a Romanesca found in the Chigi manuscripts, again starting from the B part. Another common ritornello form is just the same, only detached from the triple meter. The A and the B end with a fermata, and then comes the ritornello. As an example, I'll play the end of Storace's variation we heard before. In his case, the ritornello is repeated twice. Now we know the possible forms of the Romanesca, its most basic structure. Let's see now in what ways composers fill the gaps between the given structural points. The most basic way to elaborate things in the 16th and 17th century is simply by adding diminutions. Fundamentally, it keeps the harmonic sequence and the changes of harmony equal. This was the case in the first Romanesca pieces. Mostly, however, the notes of the Romanesca were used more as cornerstones, and in between those, composers were sometimes very creative. One way to elaborate the Romanesca is by using cadences. Let's see what happens if we apply different cadences to each of the notes of the Romanesca. Let's start with two-step tenor cadences. By the way, if you are not sure about cadences, feel free to check our special episode about that. Needless to say, these examples are just for the sake of demonstrating the use of cadences. Such a repetition of a single concept would be considered by most of the Romanesca composers as not varied enough. Let's go on with adding an authentic cadence to each of the notes of the Romanesca. And now, let's add a plagal cadence to each of the notes of the Romanesca. The last option would be to put a cantizans clause before each note. To categorize all these cases as cadences might be a bit theoretical, so another way to describe it would be to simply arrive at each of the notes of the Romanesca by ascending stepwise. Let's listen to an example. So, by using diminutions and contrapuntal building blocks, one can arrive at many different renditions of the Romanesca. Let's continue to some early Baroque tricks one can pull when making a Romanesca. Some of the differences between the classical polyphony of the High Renaissance and the music of the 17th century are the texture of the music and the number of dissonant clashes it contains. In terms of texture, the complete equality between parts changed towards the dominance of two upper parts, often moving in parallels, and a bass. A nice example for that is the famous ritornello from Monteverdi's Orfeo. The two upper parts are often moving in parallel thirds or sixths, but the main point is that these two parts together with the bass function perfectly without the two remaining parts. This five-part piece is in fact a trio, with two additional and in fact optional filling parts. This kind of texture, based on two upper parts and the bass, was very prominent from around 1600, and seemed to reflect in some cases the new way in which composers were thinking about music. This kind of texture can be seen in many of the 17th century Romanesca settings, as we will soon demonstrate. The second characteristic of early 17th century music we mentioned is the number of dissonant clashes found in the music. They are often created when different parts are making diminutions at the same time. If we take, for example, this simple progression, and we want to spice it up, we should add simple diminutions. If we add some diminution in the bass, it sounds fine. And if we add some diminutions in our two upper parts, it also sounds fine. But what if we add diminutions in the bass and in the upper parts at the same time? We get a Monteverdian flavored moment where most notes are just dissonances. This is fun. Let's make a complete Romanesca variation based on this concept. Again, this is for demonstration purposes only. No decent composer from that period would accept such lack of variety across a complete variation. Although we have played examples from actual Romanesca pieces, we didn't really look at the scores of any of them. One reason for that, as I said, was to make sure you'd be focusing on the Romanesca's skeleton when listening to the examples. But another reason is that in most cases, Romanesca pieces are notated in a very weird way. Let's see. So, as the Romanesca is in triple time, all the examples presented here were in triple time. But this was only to simplify things. Here is what a typical notation of a Romanesca bass actually looks like. As you see, it's not in triple time. Or is it? If we look from the second step of the Romanesca and ignore the bar lines, it is just like our model. The only real difference is the first note, that has 4 beats instead of 3. This extra beat in the beginning might be explained by some early Romanesca pieces that have an upbeat. So when notating a Romanesca with an upbeat, and for some reason that is not at all clear to me using a duple meter for the notation, this would be the result. This is one of these cases that a rather odd and unnatural thing got standardized and was repeated many times in practice. You can see how Frescobaldi tries to overcome this by starting with a pause in some of his variations. In short, you should remember that the first note of the Romanesca often has 4 beats instead of 3, and that there is no correlation between the triple meter of the music and the meter of the notation. This phenomenon must be understood whenever playing or examining a Romanesca. Now, although we were talking about how free and creative composers were when making Romanescas, it should be said that in most ensemble Romanesca pieces, that is, those for voice or instruments and basso continuo, the bass was often canonized. That is, it was already a fixed melody that repeated itself exactly for every verse or variation. The composer's creativity in those cases manifested itself only in the top part or parts. However, in the case of single instrument variations, composers were only bound to the skeleton of the Romanesca and were much freer. Before we finish, let's have a quick look at the first Romanesca variation of Girolamo Frescobaldi. As we said, when analyzing a Romanesca, we should first find the basic skeleton and meter. After we have found that, we can mark more musical and therefore less confusing bar lines. In terms of form, we see that Frescobaldi, at least in this variation, is using A and B and then repeats the B. We see that he uses cadential formulas leading to the main points. We see that he often uses the trio concept of 2 dominant and parallel upper voices. And because it's Frescobaldi, he also plants some imitations within the variation. Let's listen. So this was our show about the Romanesca. We hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to check the special page on our website with all the footnotes and other extra information. Feel free to comment, share and like, and see you next time at earlymusicsources.com.